First of all, thank you for the opportunity. It's a great place, a great group of people to talk to. And I must admit, after yesterday's discussions, I was going to tear up the presentation and do something completely different. I noticed I've been sandwiched between grants, which is quite amusing from my point of view. And Dave, it's actually something you said yesterday. You said, I think it was you. You said today's tradition is yesterday's innovation. And I sort of look at it a slightly different way, is innovation is actually tomorrow's tradition. So a little bit about who I am, the background, and then I've only got 5 slides, I think, and 2 of them are the ones where I feel there might be a bit discussion. But my wife always says, start with an icebreaker and tell them something they didn't think they would know. Yeah, you're not going to be told anything. The only drink that gives me a hangover is whiskey. And for many years, much to my wife's dismay, I don't drink a lot, but I can drink red wine, port, beer, cider, and I wake up in the morning and I'm fine. My poor wife will have a glass of white wine and wake up and she's got a hangover. But put a whiskey in that mix of my drinks and I wake up with a hangover. We delivered a project once. You'll notice on the right it says, keep calm, I'm not a psycho. There's 2 sides to my life, the sensible side and the not so sensible side. We delivered a project and the guys who worked for me bought me a whiskey, so I had to drink it. Woke up in the morning and I was fine. So my analytical side said, why? And my not so sensible side said, well, just go to a different bar every night and drink whiskey and you'll eventually find out what the problem is. And I discovered that if I drank a really good single malt whiskey, no hangover. So I started to investigate that. And I live in Scotland. I'm not Scottish. I'm originally from Newcastle in England. And I fell in love with the myths, the romance, the whole story around Scotch and the history. And I thought, well, why not? Let's start a distillery. So we were the first. We were the first of the new generation of small whiskey distillers in Scotland. And I like a challenge, and it has certainly been that. How did we cover the costs? Nobody would believe me. They said, what, you're going to start a distillery in Scotland, a whiskey distillery? So coincidentally, while actually looking for the location, I developed a series of gins, and we put the gins on the market. So the gins were actually the cash flow to keep the distillery going, while we quietly made the whiskey in the background. And one day we were sitting in the office and thought, is the gin a distraction to the whiskey? Or is the whiskey a distraction to the gin? Because the gin was going very well. So we made cider brandy, just to confuse it even more. And we kept doing that, and we've done it more and more and made different spirits. And we realized it's sort of a new industry. So I kicked off the Scottish Craft Distillers Association, and this was in September 2013, and chaired it for 3 years. I've just recently left it because there was just too much to do. But the major achievement we got out of the Scottish Craft Distillers was the accreditation stamp. There is now an accreditation stamp and a process. There's a separate QA group, an independent technical authority, to say that that is craft distilled in Scotland. And that is the first step to, hopefully, a protected food name. So we founded the Scottish Craft Distillers. I'll go through these quite quickly because, well, I hope to go through them quite quickly. I thought I'd sort of tell the story as a sort of gallery of what we've done at Strathearn. So we're 3 years old. Some of you were tasting our first whiskey last night. And I didn't know how to sell it. We only had 100 bottles. So I put it on a 12-week auction from the date of our birthday until the day it was ready. I must admit, I thought by week 10 I would be phoning up family and friends and saying, excuse me, bottle number 68 hasn't got a bid against it. Could somebody please do that? We had a bid against every bottle in 10 hours. And ultimately, all 100 bottles sold for a ridiculous sum of money. Now, great for us, but great for the industry. It means people around the whole world are looking at small-scale distillers, not just us. People in England, people in Tasmania, America, all over the world. We've grown up as craft distillers. So it was great. But I was asked to come here to talk about sort of looking at the past. And so we decided to sort of go back to the future. Now, let's see if this works. Those are our stills. Our big still is 1,000 litres. Our spirit still is 500 litres. We do everything very, very slowly. We have a brewery kit at the back rather than a brew house. So, like Patrick, we do a nice, clear wort. We ferment it for 5 days, very slowly at temperature controlled. Did you copy me, or did you... And I think Matt's the same. And we keep it at 22 degrees, ramping up to 24 at the end of the 5 days. And it's a lovely, light, sweet spirit. Now, the stepping back in time, a lot of people said, well, what is whiskey to me? And I look at the regulations, talk to SWA and everybody, and then realize before 1990, a lot of it was in chestnut wood casks. Now, we do a lovely, light, sweet spirit. Marry that up with the spiciness of a chestnut wood cask, and it's stunning. Well, I'm biased, obviously, but it does go well together. So we did that. And that took us back a little bit in time. Then we thought, well, when did this 3 years in oak, or 3 years in wood, come in? And it was 1915, I think, 2 years, 1916 for 3 years. So we put our spirit into cherry wood casks, mulberry wood casks, any cask we could find, small casks, casks that would fit, allegedly, one to each side of a mule, so you could run away from the excise man. So, and that's what it was like before the First World War. And prior to that, it was actually the spirit they distilled in the hills, which was the clear new make. Now, just to be controversial, I love to be controversial, and that gets me into trouble all the time, is if you take it back one step further, whiskey is distilled beer. I don't think anybody will argue with that. In Scotland, we don't have hops. So hops is the preservative in beer, so you can keep it for 28 days. You don't have to drink it immediately, as tempting as that is. So we use juniper. Juniper was one of the most common preservatives added to beer in Scotland. So our very first Scotch whiskies, and this is why I'm not too sure I want to be sandwiched between Grants and Grants on the presentations, was actually Geneva. And we thought, well, wouldn't that be fun? Let's make a Geneva. In fact, let's do a West Coast story. Let's do a peated Geneva. Let's do a peated spirit. Let's put some of our spirit into a mulberry cask, put some of it into a chestnut wood cask, and make some whiskey. And we've got the story of West Coast whiskey in drams. Right back to history. Well, you'll notice these frames are covered in red. We have a slight problem. We've sort of skirted around it, we've talked about it. It's called regulations and interpretations of those. We've been told it all started with our cider brandy. You can't call it cider brandy. It possibly has to be called cider spirit. But then they said, you can't call your new make spirit. You can't call it malt spirit. You can't call it triple distilled. You have to call it grain spirit. Now, we make 100% malt. I have a malt distilling license. I have a grain distilling license. If I call my new make grain spirit, I'm breaking HMRC laws. If I call it grain spirit, I'm actually upsetting SWA. But if I don't call it grain spirit, I'm breaking European laws. No matter what I do, I break a law. So I've had to take it off the market. Now, we do our spirit in little casks, mulberry wood casks, chestnut wood casks. Well, we don't anymore. To do that, according to food standards locally, we have to keep that for 3 years in those chestnut wood casks and call it whiskey. Now, Scottish regulations, SWA regulations, which is also law, state that any whiskey in Scotland has to be Scotch. So we can't do that either. If we call it grain spirit matured in a chestnut wood cask, made in Scotland, SWA won't let us do that because we're misleading the customer. So another 10 products off the shelf. So there is the expression, a rock in a hard place. So we've had to take, I think it's 12 products off the market. We can't do our history of whiskey in drams. All we can make is Scotch. And there are other things to talk about as well, like the verification scheme. There's a huge number of barriers to entry. I think the challenge for us is we were the first. And as a result, we keep hitting the speed bumps, every one of them. Scotch is a protected food name, a PGI. It has to have a verification process. For some unknown reason, SWA, who own the protected food name, and by the way, I get on very well with SWA. We talk a lot. They appointed Revenue and Customs, HMRC, to be the verification people. They're the duty collectors. They don't know anything about making Scotch. But they charge £1,600 per step in the process for verification. We do all 5 steps in our distillery. We mash, we ferment, we distill, we mature, we bottle. It costs us £8,000 every 2 years to be verified to make Scotch. It costs the big distillers, the guys who make millions of litres a year. Each of those distilleries costs £4,800 because they only do 3 steps of the process. Crazy, but we've hit that wall. And politics. Where's Scotland going to be in 2 years' time? There is the possibility we might be leaving the UK. Whether Europe will have us back or whether we leave, no idea. So politics gives us a lot of uncertainty. And, duty, too high, I just had to stick that in. I mean, in the UK, the brewers get a duty break up to, I think it's 30,000 hectolitres they pay half the duty. I think in Europe, there is the chance to actually pay less duty, but I think it's up to a very small amount of spirit. And it's something that I think would help the industry because we get, as a small distiller, and sorry if this appears to be a moan, it's not a moan. It's just to explain some of the challenges we've faced. And we hit all the barriers that the big guys hit, but they've been doing it for years. And one classic one was when we wanted to bond a trade facility. There are 2 forms you have to fill in. One to apply for a trade facility and one to be a warehouse owner. You can only apply for a warehouse owner if you already have a trade facility. And you can only apply for a trade facility if you're already a warehouse owner. You can't get in. It's been fixed. But those are the challenges. Now, what I'd like to do And what we were trying to do, and this is where the traditional bit comes in, if the innovation was distilling a beer, putting it into small casks to create what Scotch is today, surely if you go back and repeat the steps, how is that wrong? You're just going back in the process. But equally, you're actually creating stuff for the future. So more serious stuff? Well, I just thought I'll put some of things up just to cause a bit of conversation. I think, Ludo, you mentioned it about, is it a lifestyle versus a serious business? It's how many of us small distillers will be around in 10 years' time? I don't know. A very interesting discussion I have in many different places is the misuse and abuse of the word craft. What is craft? The classic example to me is Sierra Nevada beer. I love Sierra Nevada beer. It's lovely. Their batch size is 500,000 litres, and there's not a person in sight. And their bottling plant is the size of 4 football pitches with not a person in sight. How can that be a craft beer? But anyway. Casks, new or used. Again, somebody just threw this at me 2 days ago and said, your whiskey tastes very much like bourbon because we use new virgin oak, American oak, medium toast. And I hate the word, but this, I think, is actually probably a word for this group of people, is, I don't know who coined it, co-opetition. How can we compete and at the same time work together? We do work together very, very well. All the small distillers in Scotland, we all help each other. It's fantastic. But we all compete. How can we defend our future? How can we get around these hurdles? How can we work better with the bigger guys? Because, I mean, they do support us, and they do have a different challenge, and they do produce very good, consistent quality spirit. We're in a slightly different market. But how do we work together? And this is the great thing about the conversations I've had over the last few days, is I think this is the beginning of that. And that was it, really. Sorry if it was a bit of a moan. It wasn't meant to be, but it's just, at the minute... Yeah, at the minute, Dave, I'm in a moany mood because I've had to take 12 products off the market. Yes.
Just to increase the gloom.
I'm a happy person.
Yeah, you are a happy person. The serious question, I mean, did you, at any point, have you thought, fuck it, I'm just going to give up? Or are you just too stubborn for that?
I'm too stubborn for that. And
apologise for language. Sorry.
It's also just been at the front of the queue. We're bound to hit these speed bumps. We're bound to hit these walls. What I hate is when somebody just says no, rather than, well, you can't do that, this is how you can do it. So we're bound to keep hitting them. It is a big challenge. It's actually been going on now for 6 months, and SWA are now involved, Scottish Parliament's involved, everybody's involved in this naming stuff now, because it's, I don't know what's going to happen. And serious thought, yeah, we might actually move south of the border. Or move our maturation south of the border or something, because then the problem goes away.
So you're very much a test case. I was just wondering, given that there are so many distillers of your size, you know, that there's now a movement within Scotland, that whether there is sufficient momentum, that you're not just a lone voice, sorry, a lone wolf over here, but you're not really the lone voice anymore. You know, are you getting, is there sufficient... Are there sufficient voices being raised in opposition, or sort of saying actually that the law is an ass to help you in this?
Not really. The vast majority of distillers in Scotland, the new generation, are gin distillers. There's only about 4 or 5 of us really at the small scale of the whiskey end. I'm the first producing. I think the next one is about 12 months' time. So they're just letting me break the ice.
Right.
Yeah.
Is there any questions for this? I mean, there's a lot of stuff in here. Or I'll throw the question out here. I mean, has anybody else, in establishing their distillery, come across similar obstacles yeah. Okay. I'm glad you answered that question, because I'm now going to respond with, how did you get round those obstacles?
By talking and getting to a mutual agreement.
Who did you talk to?
The legislation.
Yeah. And they eventually came round? So it's like one-word answers here. Yes.
You know,
Yeah.
we want to build a second distillery. And one of the things we came across is they want to turn the entire distillery EX-Zone 1. The entire distillery. So that means I can't receive any guests there, because everybody will have to walk around in anti-static clothing or whatever. So you have to negotiate with these people. They have to say, okay, what is the risk really? Yes, there is flammable liquids. Yes, there is, but there's no risk of explosion because it's all contained. And then you negotiate. Say, what if we do level meters? Level meters, and then we evacuate everybody with level meters, and then we push everybody out, and then you negotiate.
Yeah.
Negotiation is the only way out. The only way forward. Negotiation.
I only built a maturation facility, but it was the first one built outside of the multinational living memory. And none of the legislators that I was doing it had any lifetime experience in legislating what I was doing. So I just showed briefly, I just printed out lots and lots and lots of examples from all over Europe of what probably a lot of people in this room were doing, and said, this is what's going on in the rest of Europe. Is there's a precedent for what I'm trying to achieve. And that doesn't work.
Didn't work at all.
It doesn't work in Scotland either, because what has happened with that, because I've done exactly the same, listed all of the distillers who produce new make malt spirit and stuff like this, and the answer that came back to me was, is that a complaint against them? And yes, negotiation on things like ATEX and all of that stuff, talk to the planners, get them involved, but this is 3 sets of laws which contravene each other. And
Sometimes doesn't agree with the other kind of
yeah, we went through 3 sets of doors on the plant room, put the first one up, fireproof. The next people come along and say, you've got to have air vents in them. Put air vents in. The fire crew come along and say, well, you can't have air vents in a fireproof door.
We had brickwork in the brickwork, and we were told that we had to take down all the bricks because bits of bricks could fall off and end up in the store.
Yes. It happens all the time.
It's very dangerous for the consumer.
Well, it's an additive you're not allowed to put in.
Martin.
I know there's a facility in Oslo where the drains are explosion-proof. And how you make explosion-proof drains, I don't know. But they were to make explosion-proof drains by the government.
I'm lost for words on that one.
Anyone want to top up? Can anybody? Yeah, Johnny.
The other one that fell foul was the fusion whiskies that Alex Bruce has been doing at Delphi, because they couldn't mix a Japanese whiskey with Scotch in Scotland and bottle it, so they had to take the whole lot
Ship
down
it
to
to-
Norfolk
yeah,
and
yeah,
bottle it in England, because otherwise it was illegal to mix the two.
Yeah.
But I mean, that's just ridiculous, isn't it, to be driving it around the country
Yeah.
to mix the two.
That's probably what we're going to have to do. We're going to have to move a lot of the stuff down into England.
But he just said there was a pause on the phone when he said, what if we just drove over the border and did it? And there was just this long pause and he went, yes, you could do that. It was almost like they'd run out of reasons to say no.
It's kind of, you wonder why there's so many distilleries getting built in the Scottish borders. I think
There's an idea.
I think we now get it. So, I mean, I'm intrigued as to the mindset. Really, Tony. I think what is coming out of this is that you're passionate about making whiskey. You really want to do this. You love it. You're fascinated by it, by its history, etc., etc. Were you surprised that as well as having this passion for it, you also then had to become a lawyer, and that that it could potentially grind you down, you know?
No, not really. As I said, I like a challenge, and I sort of guessed it was going to happen. You know, sort of kicking the trend, and trying to do a small-scale Scotch whisky distillery. No, it's I like a challenge to a certain extent. I like a fight. I think it's important for everybody else. If I can knock a barrier down, we've knocked so many barriers down. When you look at all the small distilleries starting up, and the birth of the Scottish Craft Distillers Association, things are getting easier. I mean, I started a small microbrewery 20-odd years ago, and at that point, customs and excise used to have a key to our house. And I came home one night, and there he is sitting at the table, just going through everything. You know, so at least that's easier.
Yeah. But I mean, the good news, and I presume everybody in the room, did everybody try the whiskey which Tony showed last night? Which is astoundingly great.
No, thank you.
So, yeah, if you haven't, I think some bottles might be open later on, if there's any left. Do try it, because you're making some seriously good whiskey. Because I want to finish up with this kind of, with a positive note, rather than everybody kind of sitting there going, oh God, why do we bother doing it? Come all the way to northern Sweden in the snow, and no, I'm just going to give up. Don't give up. Yes, yeah. You have to believe in your vision.
And I mean, this is why it's such a fabulous event. If we can somehow keep this rolling, keep it rolling. I mean, I think it was Matt and I were talking about it last night. Into a world, probably, what did we call it? Malts, global malts, and keep this going. It's absolutely awesome.
Yeah, the more people that join it, it's fascinating. It's something I want to pick up later in our bigger debate. Is, you know, what do we take out of this, and, you know, how does this forum become, if not a movement, then at least a talking shop, and a way in which people and companies of all sizes can actually debate this in a clear way and help to move whiskey forward. So the future is good, would you say?
The future is good. I'd like to apologise if I've put it down.
It's okay. It's good.
It really is good. It's just one of these challenges which will go away.
Yeah, that's great. Tony, thank you very much indeed. Please.
Hey.